3 days might not seem like a long time, just 72 hours. That's nothing, right? But if you commit, really commit to changing the way you speak to yourself for just those 3 days, you're going to notice something remarkable. At first it's subtle. You catch yourself mid-thought just as you're about to say, I can't handle this, and instead you pivot. I can figure this out. And suddenly there's a shift. It's like a crack of light breaking through a door that's been closed for far too long. The thing about self-talk is that it's not just words. It's the very structure through which you interpret reality. The words you repeat to yourself day in and day out become the framework of your mind. They determine what you believe is possible for you. They set the ceiling for your potential. And when you change them, when you consciously, deliberately, intelligently shift your inner dialogue, you are, in effect, reconstructing your entire perception of what you're capable of. Now, most people never even attempt this. They just assume that the voice in their head is them, that it's fixed, unchangeable, that whatever it says must be true. But that's simply not the case. That voice was shaped by years of experiences, by childhood conditioning, by failures and disappointments and the way you interpreted them. And if you don't take control of it, it will run you into the ground without mercy. Because the mind has a default setting, and that setting is survival. It's risk aversion. It's focusing on what could go wrong, because at some primal level, your brain still thinks you're living in a world where a single mistake could mean the end of you. But we don't live in that world anymore. If you want to move forward, if you want to break free from the invisible chains that have been holding you back, you have to reprogram that voice. It won't happen overnight. It won't even happen in 3 days. But 3 days is enough to prove to yourself that you can do it, that change is possible, that you're not a prisoner to the negativity that's been running your mind on autopilot. Here's what happens when you do this. By the second day, you start catching yourself before the negativity fully forms. You're about to think, I always mess up, but you interrupt it. No, I'm learning. I improve every time. And that moment of interruption, that's growth. That's proof that you are not your old patterns, that you can step outside them. By the third day, something remarkable happens. Your brain starts to anticipate the shift. You don't have to fight as hard to change the words. They start changing on their own. Instead of, I can't do this, you're instinctively saying, this is challenging, but I'm capable. And that small shift, it seems tiny, almost insignificant, but it's everything. Because now you're seeing the world differently. Your problems don't seem like permanent roadblocks. They seem like puzzles you can solve. Your failures don't seem like indictments of your character. They seem like steps in a process. And let me tell you something. Once you get a taste of that, there's no going back. Because you realize just how much of your suffering, your stagnation, your frustration was self-imposed. You were talking yourself into powerlessness, into smallness, into hesitation. And the moment you stop doing that, when you replace that inner resistance with words that build instead of break, you start moving forward in a way that feels almost inevitable. So, 3 days, that's all I'm asking you to give yourself. 3 days to speak to yourself with the kind of encouragement and belief that you would offer someone you truly cared about. 3 days to prove to yourself that your mind is not your enemy. It's your most powerful tool. And if you do this, if you really commit, you will walk away with something invaluable. The unshakable realization that the way you speak to yourself is the way you shape your world. And if you can change that voice, even for just 3 days, then you can change everything. You'd be amazed at how much can change in 3 days. Most people think transformation takes months, even years, and in some ways it does. Deep change, the kind that rewires the very foundation of your character, that's a lifelong process. But the spark, the ignition, that can happen in an instant. And 3 days, that's enough time to prove to yourself that your mind is not fixed, that you are not shackled to the same old destructive thoughts, that you are capable of stepping into something different. Now, here's what's fascinating. The moment you set out to do this, to truly shift your inner dialogue, you will encounter resistance. Your own mind will fight back, because even negative self-talk, as corrosive as it is, feels familiar. And the mind craves the familiar. It prefers a predictable misery over an uncertain possibility. But that's exactly why this challenge matters. You're disrupting the cycle. You're pulling back the curtain on the voice that has been dictating your reality. And for the first time, you're asking, is this actually true? So for 3 days, you don't just let your thoughts run wild. You take control. You listen to that voice in your head, and when it speaks in doubt, in fear, in limitation, you answer it. And you don't just answer passively, you challenge it. If it tells you, I always fail, you stop and say, really? Always? And then you find the evidence that contradicts it. Because I guarantee you, there have been times when you didn't fail. And if you find even one example, that old thought begins to lose its grip. By the end of the first day, you start noticing just how much negativity has been woven into your thinking. You realize it's not just the big things, it's the small automatic comments you make about yourself, the casual dismissals of your own potential, the way you undermine your confidence before you even begin. But here's the interesting part. By the second day, something shifts. You catch the negativity faster. You interrupt it before it gains momentum. And instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you insert a new thought. Maybe I can do this. And let me tell you, those small moments, those seemingly tiny corrections, they are the beginning of something profound. Because what you are really doing is reclaiming authority over your own mind. You are proving to yourself in real time that you are not a passive observer of your thoughts. You are the one directing them. And if you can direct them, you can change them. And if you can change them, you can change everything. By the third day, something remarkable happens. The effort begins to feel less forced. The positive thoughts don't feel like lies, they feel like options. You no longer have to wrestle your mind into submission. Instead, it starts working with you. And that's a shift that, once experienced, you can't unsee. But make no mistake, this isn't about repeating empty affirmations in the hope that the universe magically rewards you. No, this is about discipline, about taking responsibility for the words you allow to define you, about refusing to be a victim of your own unexamined beliefs. So here's the challenge. For 3 days, commit. Monitor every thought. Speak to yourself with the kind of encouragement and respect you would offer someone you care about. Because if you do this, and you do it with sincerity, you will walk away with something that most people never even glimpse, the realization that the voice in your head is not an absolute authority. It's a habit. And like any habit, it can be changed. And once you understand that, really understand it, well then, there's no telling what you might become. Most people don't even realize they're their own worst enemy. They don't see how the very things holding them back aren't external obstacles or bad luck or the so-called unfairness of life, but rather the patterns they've been reinforcing day after day through their own self-talk. It's a cycle, and once you're caught in it, it feels impossible to escape. But here's the truth. You are not trapped. You are simply repeating what you have convinced yourself is inevitable. And if you can recognize that, if you can step back for just a moment and see how this cycle operates, you can break free from it. The problem is that self-sabotage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up with a big red flag saying, "Hey, I'm here to ruin your progress." No. It disguises itself as humility, as caution, as realism. It tells you things like, "I shouldn't aim too high. I'll only be disappointed." Or, "I'm just not the kind of person who succeeds at that." It convinces you that your hesitation is wisdom, that your self-doubt is a form of maturity, and so you accept it. You repeat these thoughts, reinforcing them every single time you hesitate, every single time you talk yourself out of taking action. And that's the real danger, because the mind is always listening. It believes what you tell it. If you tell yourself you're bad at something, your brain will look for proof. If you tell yourself you'll probably fail, your mind will make sure you never risk enough to succeed. If you tell yourself you don't deserve happiness, you will find ways, subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible ways, to push it away when it comes. And you might think this is all happening outside your control, but it isn't. It's happening because you have trained your mind to work against you. Now, here's where it gets difficult. Breaking that cycle isn't comfortable, because the moment you start to change, that old voice, that old identity will fight back. It will remind you of every past failure, every time things didn't go the way you wanted. It will tempt you with the security of staying the same. Because as painful as self-sabotage is, there is something disturbingly comfortable about it. It lets you avoid responsibility. It lets you stay small without feeling like you're the one making that choice. It gives you an excuse to stay exactly where you are. But you can't afford to do that, not if you actually want to move forward. Because every time you surrender to self-sabotage, you reinforce the very beliefs that are keeping you stuck. And if you reinforce them long enough, they become your identity. You don't just believe you're incapable, you are incapable because you never act differently. And that's not fate, that's not genetics, that's a choice. So if you want to break the cycle, you have to start by challenging the voice in your head. Every time it tells you, "I can't," you have to respond with, "How do I know that?" Every time it whispers, "This isn't going to work," you answer back, "What if it does?" And more importantly, you take action before you feel ready, because if you wait until your mind gives you permission, you'll be waiting forever. It starts small. You catch yourself mid-thought. You refuse to speak to yourself with the same contempt you wouldn't dare use on a stranger. You do the thing you've been putting off. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but deliberately. And the moment you do that, the cycle cracks. The momentum shifts. You begin to realize that the only thing holding you back was the belief that you were stuck. And once that illusion shatters, There is no limit to how far you can go. Your mind is not a fixed entity. It's not a rigid, predetermined structure that you're simply stuck with. It's alive. It's adaptable. It's constantly rewiring itself based on the thoughts you feed it. And this isn't just some abstract motivational idea. It's a fact deeply rooted in neuroscience. The brain is plastic. It shapes itself according to repeated experiences, repeated emotions, and perhaps most importantly, repeated words, which means the way you speak to yourself, the thoughts you allow to dominate your internal dialogue are quite literally sculpting the architecture of your mind. Now think about that for a second. Because what that means is, if you've spent years telling yourself you're not good enough, if you've spent years reinforcing doubt, hesitation, and fear, then your brain has built pathways that make those thoughts automatic. They don't even require effort anymore. They're just there, embedded into the very structure of your thinking. And once those pathways are carved deeply enough, they begin to feel like reality itself. You don't even question them. You just assume this is who I am. But it's not. It's who you've practiced being. And that distinction is crucial. Because if your brain is built through repetition, that means it can be rebuilt through repetition. If you've conditioned yourself into negativity, you can condition yourself out of it. Not through wishful thinking, not by pretending everything is perfect, but by deliberately, consistently redirecting your thoughts. By choosing in each moment to speak to yourself in a way that constructs rather than destroys. And here's the thing, at first it feels unnatural. Of course it does. You're trying to shift patterns that have been reinforced for years. Your brain doesn't want to change easily. It wants to stick to the most well-worn paths, the ones that require the least amount of effort. So when you start shifting your self-talk, when you stop saying, I always fail, and replace it with, I am learning and improving, your brain resists. It feels fake. It feels forced. And because of that discomfort, most people quit. They assume that because the new thoughts don't feel real yet, they never will. But that's a mistake, because the discomfort isn't proof that the new thought is false. It's proof that you're rewiring something deep. It's proof that you are stepping off the old path and beginning to carve a new one. And if you do it enough, if you refuse to default back into those old patterns, if you continue speaking to yourself with clarity and purpose, that new path becomes easier. The brain adapts. The neurons fire in new ways. And before you know it, the positive self-talk that once felt forced starts to feel natural. And the negative self-talk, it starts to feel out of place. Like a foreign language you no longer speak fluently. And this isn't just some abstract psychological theory, it's physical. You are literally changing the wiring of your brain. You are restructuring neural pathways that dictate how you process challenges, how you respond to failure, how you interpret the world around you. And if that's true, if the mind is that malleable, then why on earth would you keep reinforcing patterns that make your life smaller? Why wouldn't you take full responsibility for the words you allow to define you? Because here's the truth. The way you talk to yourself is the foundation for everything else. It determines whether you take risks or retreat, whether you stand tall or shrink back, whether you believe in your own capacity to grow, or whether you resign yourself to the idea that this is just the way things are. But they're not. They never have been. And if you're willing to rewire the way you speak to yourself, if you're willing to do the work of shaping your mind instead of letting it shape you, then there's no telling how much more powerful, how much more capable, how much more awake you can become. There's something remarkable about the way words shape reality, not just externally, not just in how you communicate with others, but internally in how you communicate with yourself. The way you speak, the way you think, the patterns you reinforce, they don't just influence your emotions, they determine the trajectory of your life. And if you don't align your mind, your speech, and your spirit toward a coherent purpose, then what exactly are you aiming at? Because if you're not aiming at something meaningful, something worthy of the time and energy you've been given, then you're drifting. And when you drift, you don't just stagnate. Most people don't realize the power they wield in their own words. They don't recognize that every careless thought, every offhand remark, every instance of self-deprecation is a seed planted in the unconscious. And what you plant, you grow. If you constantly tell yourself you're lost, that you're inadequate, that you're unworthy, don't be surprised when your life takes on the shape of those words. That's not magic, that's not superstition, that's psychological inevitability. Your mind is always listening, your spirit is always responding. And if you speak chaos into your life, chaos is exactly what you will get. But the reverse is also true. If you begin to speak with precision, if you align your words with the highest possible aim, if you refuse to engage in the kind of cynical, self-defeating speech that drags you into despair, then something remarkable happens. Your mind starts to adjust. Your actions start to follow. You begin to lift yourself out of the confusion and into clarity. Not instantly, not easily, but consistently. Because speech is not just about communication, it's about direction. This is why there is such a deep connection between the psychological and the spiritual. Because your words do not operate in isolation. They are not neutral. They either bring life or they bring destruction. They either orient you towards something meaningful or they drive you deeper into nothingness. And the choice you make, whether to speak life or to speak defeat, shapes not just your mind, but your soul. You can see this in people who have completely abandoned hope. Their words reveal their inner state long before their actions do. They speak in ways that diminish themselves, that strip them of dignity, that reinforce the idea that nothing matters. And when you adopt that kind of speech, it's not long before you begin to act in ways that confirm it. But there's another way, a higher way, and it begins with refusing to let your words be dictated by fear, by bitterness, by resentment. It begins with understanding that you are responsible for what you allow to come out of your own mouth. Because every time you speak, you're reinforcing something. And if you're not reinforcing the highest possible good, then you're reinforcing something far worse. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore reality. That doesn't mean you pretend life is easy or that suffering doesn't exist or that challenges don't arise. No, it means that even in the midst of difficulty, you refuse to let your speech descend into nihilism. It means that when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, you don't add to the destruction by tearing yourself down with your own words. You acknowledge the struggle, but you speak in a way that lifts you toward a solution. You say, this is hard, but I will figure it out. You say, I may not have the answer yet, but I am capable of finding one. You speak words that point you toward responsibility, toward meaning, toward purpose. And if you do this, if you make it a discipline, a practice, a way of being, you'll notice something extraordinary. You will begin to change. Your thoughts will become clearer. Your emotions will become steadier. Your actions will become more aligned with who you could be rather than who you have been. And more than that, the people around you will begin to change too. Because words are contagious. They spread. And when you start speaking in a way that builds, that strengthens, that calls people to something higher, you become the kind of person that others look to for guidance. Not because you have all the answers, but because you have chosen to take responsibility for your words, and in doing so, you have taken responsibility for your life. So the question is, what are you speaking into existence? What are you reinforcing day after day with the way you talk to yourself? Because if it's not strengthening you, if it's not leading you towards something meaningful, if it's not aligning your spirit and your psychology toward the highest good you can possibly conceive, then it is weakening you. And weakness over time leads only to despair. You must speak life. You must speak with precision, with truth, with purpose. Because if you don't, if you allow your words to wander into cynicism and defeat, you will find yourself lost before you even realize it's happened. But if you align your speech with your purpose, if you take responsibility for the direction of your thoughts and your words, then no matter how difficult the road ahead may be, at least you will know that you are moving forward. And that is a far better alternative than the slow decay of silence. 3 days might not seem like much. It's a blink in the grand scheme of things. But 3 days is enough time to prove something to yourself. That change is not as distant or unattainable as you once believed. That transformation isn't locked away in some far-off future, waiting for the perfect moment. It's right here. And it starts the moment you decide to take full responsibility for the way you think, the way you speak, and the way you act. Now here's the challenge. For 3 days, you will change the way you talk to yourself completely. No more casual self-deprecation. No more thoughts of inadequacy left unchallenged. No more reinforcing the same tired narrative that has kept you small. And make no mistake, this will not be easy. Because if you've spent years letting negativity dictate your self-perception, if you've spent years accepting the voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough, then suddenly choosing to silence that voice is going to feel unnatural. It will feel forced. You might even feel ridiculous. But that feeling, that discomfort, it's proof that you're stepping into something new. On the first day, you will become aware, truly aware, of how you speak to yourself. And that alone will be an awakening, because most people don't even realize how much negativity they allow to run unchecked in their minds. They don't hear the subtle, corrosive ways they undermine their own potential before they even begin. But now you will hear it. And each time a self-defeating thought arises, you will stop it in its tracks, not just by rejecting it, but by replacing it. Instead of saying, I always fail, you will say, I am learning, I am growing, I am improving. Instead of saying, I'm not capable, you will say, I will figure it out. It doesn't matter if you fully believe it yet. What matters is that you begin the process of rewiring your mind, of introducing a new way of thinking, one that builds you up instead of breaking you down. By the second day, the resistance will intensify. That old voice will try to pull you back into familiar territory. It will tell you that this is pointless, that you're just lying to yourself. But you will recognize it for what it is. Fear. Not fear of failure, but fear of change. Because if you truly commit to this, If you prove that your mind can be altered, then you are left with an undeniable truth. You were never as stuck as you thought you were. And that is a terrifying realization. Because if you're not stuck, then all those years of self-doubt, all those excuses, all those times you convinced yourself it was impossible, they weren't reality. They were just habits of thought. And habits can be broken. And then comes the third day. This is where the shift happens. It won't be dramatic. It won't be some overwhelming, cinematic moment of transformation. It will be subtle, almost imperceptible, but it will be there. You'll catch yourself automatically responding to a challenge with confidence instead of doubt. You'll notice that the words you once forced yourself to say, words of strength, of resilience, of capability, don't feel so foreign anymore. And you'll realize that you are not simply pretending to be someone new. You are becoming someone new. 3 days is not enough to undo a lifetime of negative self-talk, but it is enough to prove to yourself that change is possible, that you are not a prisoner of your past, that the voice in your head is not an unchangeable truth, but a habit you've built and a habit you can break. And once you see that, once you know that, you can never go back. Because the moment you realize that transformation is within your control, the moment you experience even the slightest shift in your thinking, you will understand something that most people never do. That the only thing standing between you and a stronger, sharper, more disciplined version of yourself is the decision to take control. And you can make that decision right now. The way you speak to yourself is not just a reflection of your thoughts. It is the blueprint for your reality. Every word you allow into your mind, every phrase you repeat, every internal dialogue you engage in is shaping you, moment by moment, into the person you are becoming. And if you don't take control of that process, if you let your self-talk run on autopilot, then don't be surprised when you wake up one day feeling lost, directionless, and weighed down by a sense of limitation that was never truly yours to begin with. But the good news, the liberating truth, is that you don't have to stay there. Change is not a distant dream. It's not something reserved for other people, for those who are luckier, smarter, or more disciplined. It's something you can access the moment you decide to. And it starts with the way you think, the way you speak, and the way you align yourself with a purpose greater than your fears. 3 days is enough to begin. Enough to prove to yourself that your words hold power, that your mind can be rewired, that you are capable of stepping out of the patterns that have held you back. And once you take that first step, once you experience even the smallest shift, there is no turning back. Because you will have seen what is possible. You will have felt what it means to take responsibility for your own transformation. So, the choice is yours. You can continue as you were, reinforcing the same limitations, telling yourself the same old stories, or you can decide right now to speak with clarity, with purpose, and with strength, to reject the words that diminish you and embrace the ones that call you forward, to take control of your mind, your speech, and ultimately your life, because in the end, the words you choose will determine the person you become. And the person you become will determine everything else.